We have breaking news now. The Supreme Court has now come down on its ruling today regarding one of the most anticipated cases of the term. We're talking about Trump versus Hawaii, also known as the president's travel ban case. NBC's Pete Williams has more.
The decision says that President Trump wins. The Supreme Court has upheld the president's travel ban. This is the third version of the attempt to restrict travel from mostly Muslim countries after the first two were struck down or had a bad time in the lower courts. But by a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court says that the president has the power to control this kind of immigration in the interest of national security. You may recall the administration said this version was different, that it was enacted after surveying the policies of 200 countries around the world to see how well they gave the United States information about people who applied for visas to come to the U.S. and how good they were at fighting terrorism in their own borders. Now, after gone through that whole process, they still had the same ban on 5 of the 7 original countries that were covered by the first travel ban that was enacted shortly after the president came into office. But stepping aside from the specifics, this is a big legal victory for the president. It comes, of course, during a time when his administration is mired in an entirely different kind of immigration question. But on this one, by a 5-4 ruling, with the court's conservatives in the majority, joined by Justice Anthony Kennedy, and the court's liberals upholding the president's travel ban, striking down a lower court order that had blocked the administration from imposing the travel ban. Now, as a practical matter, the government has already been enforcing this restriction that was announced last September. The Supreme Court in December sort of prefigured today's decision by lifting a stay that had been put in place by a judge after a lawsuit from Hawaii and several Muslim organizations and Muslim individuals who said that it violated religious freedom. So, Craig, a big victory for the president. Back to you.
NBC's Pete Williams. They're reporting outside the Supreme Court. We're going to talk with Pete a little bit more, but I want to bring in MSNBC Supreme Court contributor Tom Goldstein joining me now. He is also a writer for SCOTUS blog. Tom, not an entirely unexpected ruling coming down from these justices this morning.
Not unexpected because, as Pete said, the court had allowed the ban to go into effect, but a major controversy. The court explored what to do about the president's infamous tweets, for example, and the suggestion in them that there was a religious motivation here, an attempt to keep out Muslims from the United States. And the justices said, well, we just have to look and see if there's any way we can uphold this without assuming that there's an anti-religious or an opposition to a particular religion in the proclamations. The 4 more liberal justices at the Supreme Court firing off 2 separate dissents, arguing very strongly that there was a violation of both the laws that Congress had passed regulating immigration and also a violation of the Constitution's Establishment Clause, that this was an attempt to create a religious framework in the United States.
It has been a year and change since the president first made this announcement. This was one of the, and I want to bring in some of our folks here on set to talk about the political piece of it. Tom, please don't go anywhere, because this was one of the most controversial decisions that this president made. It was one of his first policies, and I believe Pete Williams is back for us now live outside the Supreme Court. Pete, we were just discussing the political implications here. You talked about the practical implications, meaning that for many of these people trying to come into the country from these other locations, as we've been showing, nothing really changes, but it is all but certain that the Department of Justice is going to be coming out any moment, I am sure, with a statement touting this victory for them.
Well, if not them, then the White House. So there were 2. This policy was challenged on 2 grounds. First of all, the challenger said the president had no legal authority to do this because they say the law says when you're going to block a whole class of people, they have to have something in common. And the challenger said the only thing these people have in common is nationality. But the Supreme Court, again, by the 5-4 vote, said no. The authority to impose this restriction is squarely within the president's power under federal immigration law. And I must say, Hallie, based on the oral argument when this case was argued a few months ago, it seemed pretty clear that that's the direction they were going to go in. The touchier question was whether the Supreme Court would, how they would react to the second line of attack, which was that this law was passed with religious animus, that it was directed against Muslims. And here they cited the president's campaign statements where he said, notably, Donald J. Trump wants to block all Muslims from coming to the U.S. They say that he kept up these statements even after he became president. But the Supreme Court said today that they don't buy that. If you look at the history of the law, it seems pretty clear that it was based on a need to establish national security and not based on religious animus. So this is the first big legal victory for President Trump, I think you could say anywhere, because he had such a beating on his first two versions of the travel ban in the lower courts. And of course, it's his first big victory on any policy question before the Supreme Court, a 5-4 ruling. Now, we've got one more, at least I think, one more day here of activity at the Supreme Court, and there's still a big question hanging over this court, and that is whether there are going to be any retirements. The one that we most often think about is Justice Anthony Kennedy, not because he's the oldest justice, he's the oldest at 81, he'll turn 82 next month, but because last year we know he thought about stepping down, and so we'll see whether he's going to do that again this time. But he was on the court to give this president a 5-4 victory, a very big one for President Trump, Hallie.
Pete Williams there outside the Supreme Court. Pete, thank you. You heard Pete reference some of the comments that the president made regarding what he called a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Here's a look back at what the president has said about his travel ban.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. You have no choice. You know, this is a very dangerous period of time because while everybody's talking and dealing, a lot of bad people are thinking about, hey, let's go in right now.
Go to the Supreme Court, you think?
Good. We'll see. Hopefully it doesn't have to. It's common sense. You know, some things are law, and I'm all in favor of that. And some things are common sense. This is common sense.